Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Come and See. This is a Soviet anti-war film made in 1985. It was directed by Elim Klimov. Klimov is the kind of artist that is really uncompromising when it comes to his vision. He is very true to what he feels at any given moment, it feels like. And that kind of point of view, especially when it's coming from a very volatile place, a very deeply wounded place, I think can be truly special when it comes together. And I think that's the situation here. This is a very difficult film to experience, but also, it was a very difficult film to get made, a difficult film to shoot. But because of that passion, I think he did it for all the right reasons. And this film is, of course, known for being just completely unrelenting, just a horrific, nightmarish peek into one specific aspect of World War II, the Belarusian resistance movement, but seen through the eyes of a young teenage boy who joins said movement. And this is a movie, like I said, that is very close to Klimov. He used a lot of his experiences when he was a young boy, and it kind of fueled a lot of what you see in this film. But not only that, he co-wrote the film, but he also wrote it with a man named Ales Adamovich. And Adamovich basically was that young boy. He was Fiora in a lot of ways because he was actually part of that Belarusian resistance movement in real life. And I just don't think that you can capture this level of intensity and this level of just realism and immersion unless you've been through said conflict, or you've been through something very similar. But of course, having decades and decades of perspective on it, I think helps a lot. Because this is not like most historical war films that you're used to seeing, particularly American, like Hollywood films. When you think of that, you typically associate those with like big, grand, sweeping epics. And I think especially in America, war films are very literal in terms of how they are presented to us. There's just a sense of removal, and there's a million Hollywood epics, and many of them very good, over the years. You have the classics like, The Deer Hunter, you have Saving Private Ryan, Patton, Schindler's List, Gone with the Wind even. Some of those films I like more than others, but they all do have their own merit, and they should be recognized for it in their own right. But there's something particularly about like the Spielbergian war films that I just, like I said, I've always felt this sense of detachment, a disconnect, because it's always treated more from like a hindsight perspective, as though we're looking at history, like it's in the rearview mirror, as though it's like something that's happened a long time ago and we've learned from the experience, which is fine. But I think because of that, a lot of those movies just don't feel as real to me. Like a lot of historical tales, they're sort of condensed and trimmed down to kind of like metaphorically capture all of the things that this particular point in history represented. And there's a romanticism to it, like a lot of cliches you see. My favorites, of course, are the ones where you see the soldier that pulls out the black and white photograph of his fiance or his wife constantly to remind him why he's fighting. A lot of men in uniform in boardrooms getting, very intensely close to each other with clenched jaws. And again, those movies, some of them good, but a lot of them do win Oscars because that's a type of movie that is very accessible because of that rear view perspective. And so that devastation is never too close for comfort. And yes, I argue even in a movie like Schindler's List. And that's fine, but I think when you are able to remove that social perspective, that social expectation, that romanticism for sure, and bring us into the experience in a way that not only causes the edges of the frame to melt away, but it's almost as though like your soul merges with the soul of the character in a way. And when you achieve an effect that is that intense and that transcendent, it makes all of the other movies that I listed here today just pale in comparison, just blows them out of the water. It's so effective, in fact, that I feel like I have to warn people before they dive right into the experience, just so they know, what they're in for, because it is so beyond tangible, more obvious emotions that we would associate with survival or devastation. This is kind of, our emotions at their most cinematic, where they're really, just boldly facing the towering inferno in the face. And I think people that have experienced that stress of being that close to death, being really close to extreme edges of the emotional spectrum, I think they're the ones who can truly express it in a really authentic way artistically. Sometimes the movies that are more effective to me and more honest, ironically, are the ones that trust in the manipulation to express that truth rather than relying on what is historical, what is factual. in the right narrative artistic circumstances. For instance, I always point to that audition scene, Betty's audition in David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. I think it truly expresses how manipulation brings out the honesty and the most emotional, raw things, but again, through that manipulation. And Come and See is able to do that, again, from that type of perspective. And I don't even look at this film necessarily as a war film, even though that's what it is. It's not the first thing that comes to my mind because it feels so much of an internal experience. It takes the relentless brutality of war and allows us to experience all of those extremes in different ways, from the hysteria of what it's like to be the victim to just the cruelty and the evil of the villain, and everything in between, because this film is not black and white. It couldn't be more opposite than black and white. It's, you know, mixing all of these strange perspectives that you might have in a really horrific experience into a very surrealistic, very psychologically abstract, eerily poetic piece of filmmaking. They blend together and create that human experience. And of course, when put to the test, when you are in the 7 circles of hell, that's when all is revealed. Come and See reminds me of so many of the great filmmakers in the history of cinema, but as though they're all put together. You know, there are bits of it that remind me of Stanley Kubrick, especially that kind of very distant, controlled sort of camera movement. It reminds me of the imagery in ways reminds me of a lot of Tarkovsky. The faces in particular remind me of Carl Dreyer or Ingmar Bergman. There's an authenticity, a grit to it that reminds me of Herzog. The surrealism and the exaggerated quality of the performances and everything reminds me of David Lynch, and yet it's still somehow its own surrealistic melange. It's the invasion of those personal spaces, those close-ups that are just so incredibly powerful. And I think it's the use of that narrow aspect ratio that really just draws your focus all in to what is most important. And it makes it feel as though they're almost right in front of you for real and they are staring you in the face. And you will never forget these faces, just, you know, those haunted, chilling, ghostly, ravaged faces. There is a claustrophobia and a paranoia while you're watching it because it is, again, so unrelenting. The emotion of everything is just to the extremes a lot of the time throughout the film. And again, a lot of that mental stress is causing all of those emotions to fluctuate all over the spectrum. So, you know, some kind of trickle into others in a way that causes a sort of insanity to happen. And this movie does have that psychological paranoia that does remind you of like a maximum security asylum. The kind of images you see of people that are just so wigged out on psychological trauma or whatever it is. And by doing that, there's a weird combination of 2 feet in both worlds where it's the kind of performances, this movie has the kind of performances that feel so incredibly realistic and yet at the same time still completely removed from reality. A lot of war movies are very dark, naturally, because they are war films, and war is a horrible, horrible thing, one of the worst aspects of humanity in a lot of ways. But I feel like in a lot of war films, they lack the complexity to be able to explore the shades of that darkness. I look at Saving Private Ryan, for example. When you look at the look of that movie, it has kind of a very monochromatic, very dulled color palette, which, you know, does make sense for certain sequences. For instance, the sequence at the beginning, you know, the Normandy Beach sequence is extraordinary, and the color works for that. But when you carry that same murky look all the way through the movie, and it's been a long time since I've seen it, but from what I recall, it was the majority of the movie, that murkiness causes everything to kind of flatten within the frame, and I lose so many interesting facets, I feel like, aesthetically, visually. War is so many things, and I feel like a lot of filmmakers are afraid to delve into those complexities because, you know, they're afraid they might disrespect fallen heroes or whatever, but to me, no. Come and See it is much more honoring the people who died because it pushes even further into that subversion of those emotions that we do experience, as I've said. And, you know, like, again, when I look at Private Ryan, there's something very one note about the way it makes me feel, that grimness of that reality. But with this film, you know, there are a lot of horrors, but there's a lot of strange beauty because, you know, war sometimes happens in beautiful places. I think I like to use the example of, you know, imagine being in Vietnam, fighting in Vietnam, and horrible, horrific things are happening all around you. You know, your friends, the soldiers around you are dying one by one, and it's like a nightmare, and yet you're in this mystical, beautiful jungle. and you know, that's got to trip you out. And it's so rare for movies to really be able to see a lot of that. It creates a very haunting quality, and Come and See explores all of the in-between, all of those gray areas, the beauty, the strangeness, even the humor that starts out so faint, very subtle, and then it gets bigger and bigger in a sort of, like I said, David Lynch sort of quality in terms of the performances, where it starts to get bigger and it twists into something that becomes terrifying, like a nightmare. There are some beautiful, beautiful sequences in this movie. Some of my favorite sequences actually happen in the first act of the movie. Those sort of dreamy sequences that take place in the forest, where you have the rain coming down and the reflection of the rainbow. There's a cleansing quality to it, a transcendent quality, but then it starts to, again, twist into something that is off kilter. All these bombs are going off in this gorgeous, you know, this beautiful setting. And when all is quiet, suddenly all the wildlife comes out. And it's this sort of feeling that even amidst the pain, amidst whatever horrors you're going through, other aspects of life continue. And those stunning images that feel just really natural, but also almost mystical in quality, it creates a feeling within that's just, it's really hard to describe. And I also love the use of sound in this film. It's absolutely extraordinary, I think, because it uses, again, things that you wouldn't expect, very unlikely sound effects, uses unlikely music and such. And those little things are just brilliant, brilliant touches. Again, when you're in a survival situation, sometimes even during the worst moments, like weird memories come back to your mind, very abrupt and very random. Weird things come out of desperation. It's true. Even abstract things, even artistic things. You know, I also think about the image of the burning building at the end. This horrible thing is happening, and then it cuts to, you know, like this surrealistic image of a woman eating lobster. Just these knee-jerk reactions to horrible things. And the images, almost every single one in this film, they're just some of the most extraordinary, the most haunting, the most powerful, most stunning I've ever seen in anything. And a lot of it is because of the composition. It's the detail, it's the thought that's put into all of them. A lot of people like to utilize the close-up nowadays, you know, in that Bergman-esque Carl Dreyer way that I mentioned. But it feels more like they're wanting to just put the emotion right at the center, right at the forefront, so that they can wring it out of the scene. And that focus on manipulative emotions just rings false to me. It feels like there's no real thought behind it other than the obvious, and no thought to the composition beyond just wanting to seem arty. And this just obliterates all of that. Again, just blows it right out of the water. Those close-ups, particularly of the protagonist here, Fyora, who is played by Alexei Kravchenko, and his friend in the movie, Glasha, I think they're some of the most effective close-ups that I've ever seen, and they will stay with you probably forever. Alexei Kravchenko in particular, I mean, I don't know how old he was when he shot this movie. I'm gonna guess around 13, 14. But he has the hardest job. I mean, because he has to carry just this harrowing emotion, this weight of the whole movie on his shoulders, every scene. And he does it better than some of the great trained actors who are twice his age, 3 times his age. It's one of the most extraordinary performances I've ever seen. And for somebody to be that young and to be able to tap into the darkness of those emotions in that way is absolutely amazing. In terms of the composition, some of my favorite things are the split diopter shots. And you see, there's a couple that come to mind to me. One that's towards the end of the movie, and another one I think that's more in the middle of it. It utilizes the fury and the emotion in his eyes, but it also, you know, it's connecting it all the way through the frame in a way that, again, feels almost like they've merged together, more surrealistic. And the one you see at the end, where you see Fyora's face and he's just, you know, he's spent after all that he's seen. And, you know, in the background, you see that picture of Hitler, that poster that's in the puddle, and it's connecting them together. And the moment where he, you know, during the montage where he's shooting at the picture over and over and over again, to me, that made me cry, you know, just because I felt like it was so complex in terms of what it made me feel. It's a range of things, how every human being has the capability for true heroism, true acts of good and kindness, and how it's so easy to slip over into darkness, into evil. And again, we all have these points in our lives when we could go one way or the other. And I think a lot of the times we're closer to going over into madness than we want to believe. And moments like this, like in this particular scene, are the true tests of that. They are the true moments of risk, the fragility of life, the meaning of anger and fear and love and life are all just, it's as if they're right on the edge of a razor blade, if I'm going to quote Apocalypse Now, another brilliant war film. A film that to me also uses war more as the framework to explore deeper, more existential themes as they pertain to humanity's relationship with death. Both of those films are bold and brave, and they lack the fear to tap into those dark parts of the soul. Because at some point in time, whether you want it or not, we are all going to be brushed with that mortality. You know, some people would rather live more with blissful ignorance, and that's fine. It's totally within your right, and you may not be interested in watching art unless it's more for escapism, for entertainment. But to me, I feel like almost everyone should watch this film at some point. And you should watch it for all the reasons that you are afraid of it. Because I think it could bring something out in you that maybe you wouldn't expect. And that is the power of art. That is what art can do. But of course, when you're emotionally ready for it, if you're emotionally ready for it. And the thing is, no matter what you see in this movie, you have to also remember, as Klimov reminds you, especially with the camera work in the end of the movie, this is just one small sliver, just the tiniest part of a much bigger war where millions and millions of people suffered. And that's an extraordinary thing. And yet still that sympathy of exploring the individual that is Flora and his experiences is so palpable, that it left me speechless at the end. And I'm rarely speechless. Klimov never made another film after this movie. I think he just gave all that he could, I think, with this last movie. And he did say that he didn't really feel like he needed to explore much more within the film medium anymore. And honestly, I'm totally okay with that. I get it, actually, because I think that with this movie in particular, the ambition was so fierce and so piercing to the core, so vulnerable, that I think maybe his relationship with the art form and his relationship with his own trauma sort of merged together in a harmonious way and really hit that sweet spot that allowed things to be expressed in the most organic way, where it really blooms beautifully. And to go beyond that, I think might exacerbate things a little bit. He only made a handful of movies, but you know, it's like, who cares? You know, if you make one movie, especially a movie like Come and See, that movie is more than most directors' entire resume, their entire career. So I am okay with the small filmography, as I've been with a lot of my favorite directors. But Klimov, I think, he has given us a true gift because he gave us something that truly matters. So please see it, but just, again, be forewarned. And that is my video. Thank you guys so much for watching. All of my patrons are over here. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. If you like art and you like to support young, starving artists like myself, I am an artist and I sell commissioned portraits and prints of my work on my website, deepfocuslens.com. You're welcome to peruse. If you want a commission, just email me. My email is below and we can talk. Other than that, all of my social media is below. You can watch more videos here and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.